Snoop Dogg's empire found itself under siege when an overzealous homeowners association HOA president began using petty rules to try and force him out of his own home. This was no ordinary neighborhood squabble, it was a ruthless power play that would leave everyone speechless. Welcome to a tale where raw, unfiltered truth shakes the very foundations of injustice. After years of relentless touring and countless electrifying performances on stage, Snoop Dogg, iconic rapper, savvy entrepreneur, and connoisseur of the finer things in life, finally decided it was time to put down roots. His lifelong dream had been to escape the constant buzz of the road and retreat to a haven of luxury and peace. That dream led him to Silverwood Estates, an exclusive gated community where every residence stood as an ode to style, luxury, and tranquility. In true mogul fashion, he had acquired not one but an entire collection of mansions within the community, a veritable empire of elegant homes. His newest acquisition was a striking two-story brick estate featuring a graceful wraparound porch, lush landscaped gardens, and a spacious backyard that whispered promises of intimate gatherings under starlit skies. Yet from the moment he stepped through the front door of his new mansion, Snoop sensed something amiss. Amidst the chaos of moving boxes cluttering the driveway, an unsettling feeling of being watched crept over him. As he strolled around his property, darkened windows and half-drawn curtains offered furtive, almost resentful glances from neighbors who seemed to vanish as quickly as they appeared. Instead of receiving the warm welcome he expected, he was met with an uneasy silence and a series of suspicious stares, leaving him to wonder if he had unwittingly bitten off more than he could chew. The first direct encounter came on a brisk morning when Snoop Dogg was savoring his inaugural cup of coffee in his elegant kitchen. A sharp, insistent knock echoed through the house. Opening the door, he was greeted by Victoria Garner, a woman in her mid-60s impeccably dressed in a tailored cream blouse, her pearl earrings glistening softly, and an HOA emblem pinned neatly to her cardigan. With an air of rigid authority, she introduced herself briskly. "Good morning, I'm Victoria Garner, president of the Silverwood Estates Homeowners Association." Snoop Dogg offered a relaxed smile and extended his hand, but before he could speak a word, Victoria swept past him to survey the interior of his home. "I know who you are," she declared abruptly, producing a thick stack of printed documents from her clipboard. The papers detailed standard HOA guidelines, from rules about lawn maintenance and restrictions on exterior paint colors to specific approved designs for mailbox fixtures. As her gaze fell on the moving truck parked in his driveway, she added in a clipped tone, "We like to maintain a certain standard here. I assume you'll have that truck removed by this evening?" Raising a skeptical eyebrow, Snoop replied coolly, "It'll be gone once I'm done unpacking." Victoria nodded curtly, adding as she turned away, "And just so you know, the HOA requires that trash bins be placed at the curb no earlier than 6 a.m. on collection day. I noticed yours were out last night." Snoop calmly explained, "They were left by the previous owners." Her lips pursed in disapproval as she reiterated, "I see. In the future, please be mindful we have rules for a reason." In the days that followed, it became painfully clear that Victoria's obsession with enforcing even the most trivial infractions was not merely a quirk of her personality, it was personal. One crisp morning, a pristine white envelope bearing the official HOA stamp arrived in his mailbox. The notice accused him of parking an unauthorized vehicle in his driveway, claiming he had a second car on the property even though it was none other than his prized ride. That same day, another letter arrived, this time citing improper lawn maintenance because his grass had grown just a fraction too long. Soon after, a formal violation letter detailed that his porch light was excessively bright, a rule curiously never enforced on any other property in the community. By the end of the week, his mailbox was overflowing with neatly stapled letters, each a calculated attempt by Victoria to nitpick every detail of his life. Despite not having encountered her face to face since that first meeting, Snoop Dogg maintained his cool demeanor. He speculated that perhaps Victoria was simply the kind of person who pushed every minor infraction to an extreme, or that if he complied meticulously with every obscure guideline, she might eventually leave him alone. That hope, however, was dashed one evening. While taking a leisurely walk around his estate, he noticed a small group of so-called neighbors gathered near a driveway. Their hushed conversation fell abruptly silent as he approached, and one of the women forced a tight smile before the others quickly dispersed. There, at the center of the group, stood Victoria, arms crossed and engaged in a low, urgent conversation with another resident. It was at that moment Snoop Dogg realized that this wasn't merely about enforcing obscure HOA rules, it was a personal vendetta, a scheme designed to force him out that very evening. Later that evening, as he relaxed on his porch with a chilled beverage in hand, he discovered another letter slipped through the door. This time, the notice concerned his outdoor seating arrangement. It claimed that his two stylish wicker chairs and the small glass table chosen for both their aesthetic appeal and comfort did not conform to the community's arbitrary uniformity rule. Intriguingly, similar outdoor furniture that was clearly aged and made of plastic appeared perfectly acceptable on other properties. Recognizing the pattern, Snoop Dogg understood that Victoria was weaponizing trivial violations to harass him and force his departure. Unwilling to be overwhelmed, he decided to fight back on his own terms. One early morning, armed with a camera and a determined spirit, Snoop Dogg embarked on a deliberate walk through Silverwood Estates. He documented every apparent infraction he could find: overgrown lawns, broken fences, faded house numbers, and trash bins left at the curb well past the designated time. To his astonishment, he discovered that dozens of his neighbors' properties exhibited the same minor issues, yet none had received a single violation notice. With meticulous care, he drafted a polite yet pointed email to the HOA board, questioning why his property was being singled out while others enjoyed leniency. The response was silent until 2 days later when Victoria reappeared at his doorstep. This time, she did not knock, she simply stood there, clipboard in hand, her eyes roaming over the interior of his home as if conducting a surprise audit. Without preamble, she held up a formal form and stated, "This is a formal request for you to submit proof of home ownership. We've received complaints from neighbors who have noticed unusual activity, different vehicles coming and going, frequent furniture deliveries at odd hours. Some even suspect you might be renting this property in violation of HOA regulations." Snoop Dogg couldn't help but let out a short, amused laugh. "You're kidding, right? First of all, I own this house outright. I just moved in after a long tour. Yes, there has been extra delivery activity and extra cars, but they belong to my friends and family." Victoria's expression grew even sterner. "We have policies to ensure all homeowners are properly vetted. I need you to verify your deed immediately." Calmly, he replied, "You can pull the records yourself, they're public information. I'll consider it if you escalate." Satisfied that he had finally provoked a reaction, Victoria's lips curved into a smile that lacked any warmth. She turned away, and that very evening, while Snoop Dogg sat on his porch savoring his drink, he noticed her again. This time she was at the very edge of his driveway, deeply engaged in conversation with a sharply dressed man in a polo shirt and khakis. Victoria was animatedly gesturing towards his mansion as the man scribbled notes fervently. It was unmistakable, she was no longer content with merely issuing petty violations. She was actively plotting his removal. With a steely gaze, Snoop Dogg realized that every move Victoria made was calculated to force him out of the one place he had dreamed of calling home. The following morning brought an unexpected twist. Instead of the customary HOA notice, a thick envelope from a law firm arrived. Inside was an official complaint filed with the county housing authority. The complaint accused him of fraudulent occupancy, alleging that he had failed to provide proof of home ownership and insinuating that he was illegally renting out the property under false pretenses. The document, written in dense legal jargon, was designed to overwhelm him with red tape. For a moment, Snoop considered ignoring it. The accusations were absurd, after all, his deed was impeccable. But then he recognized the true intent. Victoria was determined to drain his energy and resources until he would eventually walk away. Not one to be intimidated, Snoop Dogg made a decisive call that very evening. "Yo, what's good, Tony?" He reached out to his longtime real estate attorney, Tony Delgado, a sharp and relentless legal eagle known for turning tables on even the most formidable opponents. Within hours, Tony armed him with the legal firepower needed not only to defend himself but also to reverse the entire situation. A few days later, an emergency HOA board meeting was convened. The room was packed with homeowners, board members, and curious onlookers, all anticipating the showdown between Snoop Dogg and Victoria Garner. Victoria sat at the head of a long conference table, her expression a mask of calm despite the storm of tension in her eyes. Board members flanked her, some fidgeting nervously, others pretending to be absorbed in their notes as hushed whispers filled the room like a brewing storm. Victoria began the meeting in a measured tone, presenting a printed document. "We are here to address the ongoing issues regarding Mr. Dogg's residence, given the numerous infractions and concerns raised by our community members." Before she could continue, Snoop Dogg interrupted in a calm yet commanding voice, "I'm speaking now." A ripple of murmurs swept across the room as he sat down and carefully arranged a stack of his own documents on the table. Slowly, he unfolded the first paper and held it up for all to see. "This," he declared, "is the legal proof of my home ownership. My deed is recorded, indisputable, and in perfect order." Heads turned and a few board members exchanged surprised glances. Next, he revealed a second document. "This is the purchase agreement for 214 Oak Ridge Drive, one of the many investments I've made in this community." A murmur of curiosity ran through the room, and Victoria's face remained impassive, though a flicker of uncertainty danced in her eyes. Then, with deliberate calm, he produced a final document and announced, "And this is the deed for 216 Oak Ridge Drive, Victoria Garner's own mansion." A stunned silence fell as the weight of the revelation sank in. The very woman who had spent weeks weaponizing HOA rules to intimidate him now found her own status called into question. Snoop Dogg let the silence linger before continuing, "For weeks, you have exploited minor infractions and arbitrary fines as weapons to push me out of my own home. Now tell me, who is really the trespasser here?" Victoria's mouth opened slightly, but no words came as she struggled to salvage her authority. In a last-ditch attempt, she slid a printed form across the table. "This is your final warning," she declared sharply. "Replace your porch furniture and ensure your lawn remains at the regulated length at all times." Snoop Dogg studied the paper for a long moment before replying, "I've read the HOA bylaws cover to cover, and nowhere does it state that perfectly functional furniture must be replaced." A tense silence fell over the room as Victoria's carefully constructed facade wavered. Board member Samuel Cruz, the vice president of the HOA, cleared his throat. "We do appreciate your concerns, Mr. Dogg, but the board determines which issues require action. Not every minor infraction warrants a formal notice." Snoop Dogg scoffed lightly and asked, "Then why is it that every violation on my property is noted while others are conveniently ignored?" Victoria's nostrils flared in silent indignation. For a moment, the room held its breath before she whispered with a strained smile, "If you refuse to comply, then I'll have no choice but to escalate the matter with the board." Calmly, Snoop Dogg replied, "Then do what you must," folding the violation notice in half and placing it on the table. Victoria seethed with fury. Later that evening, as Snoop Dogg relaxed on his porch with a cold drink, he spotted Victoria once more, this time standing at the edge of his driveway, engaged in a hushed conversation with board member Samuel Cruz, a distinguished gentleman with salt and pepper hair clutching a clipboard. Victoria's animated gestures and whispered words made it clear that she was no longer content with issuing petty fines. She was actively scheming his complete eviction. Snoop Dogg's eyes narrowed as he realized the full extent of her determination to force him out of the sanctuary he had so diligently acquired. The following morning, another email arrived in his inbox bearing the subject notice of violation. This email, like its paper predecessors, accused him of having non-conforming porch furniture, despite the fact that his chosen wicker chairs and glass table perfectly complemented the upscale aesthetic of his mansion. The email insisted they were out of line with community standards. Snoop Dogg leaned back, exhaling slowly as he recognized the repetitive tactic at play. Soon after, a second email with the subject "Second Notice," lawn maintenance violation, arrived even though he had just trimmed and edged his lawn to perfection. Clearly, Victoria's goal was to amass enough trivial infractions to wear him down. Unwilling to be bullied any further, Snoop Dogg resolved to fight back on his own terms. That very evening, he embarked on another meticulous walk through Silverwood Estates, camera in hand. This time, he documented every legitimate violation he could find: broken fences, overgrown lawns, faded house numbers, and trash bins left at the curb well past the designated time. With time-stamped photos and detailed notes, he compiled a comprehensive report of the inconsistencies in rule enforcement. In less than 24 hours, he sent his evidence-backed list of complaints to the HOA board. The following day, Victoria returned to his doorstep. This time, she wasn't alone. Standing with her were Victoria and Samuel Cruz. The atmosphere was thick with tension as Victoria's eyes flashed with irritation. "Mr. Dogg," she began stiffly, "we received your list of complaints." Crossing his arms, Snoop Dogg replied evenly, "Good. That means I'm not the only one held to these absurd standards." Samuel Cruz cleared his throat and addressed the assembly cautiously. "According to our bylaws, the board has the authority to decide which issues warrant formal action." Snoop Dogg's lips curled into a quiet scoff. "Yet every violation on my property is noted while others are ignored." Victoria's face darkened further as she slid yet another printed form across the table. "This is your final warning before fines are issued. Your porch furniture must be replaced and your lawn must always be maintained at the regulated length." Snoop Dogg studied the paper for a moment before replying, "Victoria, I'm not oblivious. I know your game. These so-called violations aren't about enforcing rules, they're about making me feel unwelcome. I've read through the HOA bylaws, and nowhere does it state that I must replace perfectly functional furniture on a whim." A heavy silence descended as he continued deliberately, "Let me ask you, if one of my neighbors were in the same situation, would we even be having this conversation?" Victoria's nostrils flared in indignation, and finally, with a strange smile, she whispered, "If you refuse to comply, then I'll have no choice but to escalate the matter with the board." Snoop Dogg's response was firm and unyielding, "Then do what you must." He closed the door before she could add another word, leaving Victoria simmering in silence. That evening, while Snoop Dogg sat on his porch with a cold drink, he noticed Victoria once again, this time at the very edge of his driveway, deep in conversation with Samuel Cruz, who diligently took notes on his clipboard. It was clear that Victoria was not satisfied with merely issuing petty fines. She was now plotting his complete eviction. Snoop Dogg's eyes narrowed as he grasped the depth of her scheme to drain his energy and force him out of his property by piling on one trivial violation after another. The next morning, an official legal document arrived, not an HOA notice, but a thick envelope from a law firm. Inside, an official complaint filed with the County Housing Authority accused him of being a fraudulent occupant. The allegations claimed that he had failed to provide proof of home ownership and insinuated that he was illegally renting out the property under false pretenses, citing unnamed neighbors' concerns about his presence. Although the legal language was dense and designed to overwhelm him with bureaucracy, Snoop Dogg saw right through it. This was Victoria's final attempt to exhaust him. Instead of succumbing, Snoop Dogg made a call that very evening. "Yo, Tony, what's happening?" Reaching out once more to his longtime attorney Tony Delgado, a legal eagle renowned for turning even the most daunting challenges into victories, he received all the necessary legal tools to defend himself and reverse the situation entirely. A few days later, the emergency HOA board meeting was in full swing. The room was filled with homeowners, board members, and curious onlookers eagerly anticipating the dramatic showdown between Snoop Dogg and Victoria Garner. Victoria sat at the head of the long conference table, her face composed yet betraying hints of inner anxiety. Board members were seated around her, some fidgeting nervously, others scribbling notes as murmurs filled the room. Victoria began in a measured tone, "We are here to address the ongoing issues regarding Mr. Dogg's residence, given the numerous infractions and complaints received from community members." Before she could continue, Snoop Dogg interrupted firmly, "I'm speaking now." A murmur rippled through the assembly as he carefully laid his stack of documents on the table. Slowly, he unfolded the first paper, holding it high for all to see. "This is the legal deed to my mansion," he declared, "recorded, indisputable, and in perfect order." The board members exchanged surprised glances. Next, he presented the purchase agreement for 214 Oak Ridge Drive, one of the many properties he owned in Silverwood Estates, a clear sign of his commitment to the community. Finally, with deliberate emphasis, he produced the ultimate revelation, "And this," he announced, "is the deed for 216 Oak Ridge Drive, Victoria Garner's very own mansion." A stunned silence fell over the room as the implications of her secret ownership became undeniable. With steady and resolute voice, Snoop Dogg continued, "All this time you exploited minor infractions and wielded arbitrary fines as weapons to push me out of my own home. Now tell me, who is really trespassing here?" Victoria's carefully rehearsed responses faltered. She attempted to justify her actions by referencing her earlier complaint accusing him of fraudulent occupancy. "I am not at liberty to disclose the names of the complainants," she stammered weakly. Snoop Dogg arched an eyebrow and remarked, "Funny, because I spoke with several neighbors before this meeting, and none expressed any concern about my residence. Instead, they noted how selectively these rules have been enforced." Board member Samuel Cruz cleared his throat and suggested cautiously, "Perhaps we should review these concerns properly." Snoop Dogg pressed on, "Look around you. If every homeowner were subjected to fines for every broken fence, overgrown lawn, or misplaced trash bin, we wouldn't be having this conversation solely about my property." With calculated clarity, he proposed, "Let us file a formal complaint against Victoria Garner for harassment, falsifying complaints, and misusing her authority for personal grievances. Who is with me?" One by one, hesitant hands rose amid murmurs of dissent. Even some board members exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, Samuel Cruz admitted, "According to our bylaws, the board does have the authority to remove an HOA officer found abusing their position." With that, a vote was called, and the majority declared that Victoria Garner was officially removed as president of Silverwood Estates HOA, effective immediately. The room erupted in a mix of relief and quiet approval. Gathering his documents and preparing to leave, Snoop Dogg glanced back at Victoria, whose face now burned with a blend of rage and disbelief. Softly but firmly, he said, "Victoria, you spent weeks using petty rules to force me out of my own home, and now the entire community knows the truth." Her carefully maintained facade crumbled as the weight of her actions became undeniable. Yet that same evening, Victoria was not ready to concede defeat without a fight. Snoop Dogg spotted her once more, this time standing at the very edge of his driveway, accompanied by her husband, Leonard. With a stern, anxious expression, Victoria declared, "I want to discuss the sale of my home." Snoop Dogg's eyebrows rose in disbelief. "Sale? You're talking about selling your mansion?" he countered, his tone mixing irony and resignation. "I'm not selling my property. I built this community from the ground up, and every mansion here is part of my legacy." Victoria's jaw clenched as she continued, "I've lived in this house for 32 years, and you can't just..." Her words were abruptly cut off by Snoop Dogg's interjection, "You never paid off the debt attached to it, did you?" Leonard attempted to interject, "We prepared to offer you a fair price," his voice strained with the weight of years lost. "Define fair," Snoop challenged, leaning against his railing with measured poise. Victoria huffed, her patience wearing thin. "The same amount you paid at auction," she snapped. Snoop Dogg shook his head and let out a short laugh. "That's South not how real estate works, Victoria. You lost your house due to unpaid fees, and I legally purchased it. If you want it back, you'll have to buy it at market value." After a heavy pause, he stated firmly, "Given the location, the current market, and your overdue fees, it's $450,000. Victoria's face twisted in disbelief. "That is outrageous," she muttered. Snoop Dogg's tone remained even as he replied, "Then there's no argument, you'll have to find somewhere else to live." For the first time, genuine panic flashed in her eyes as the empire she had clung to began to crumble irreversibly. In the ensuing weeks, as Victoria's financial pressures mounted and her attempts to reclaim power only deepened her woes, a for sale sign appeared in front of 216 Oak Ridge Drive. Unable to secure a bank loan for the exorbitant sum, Victoria and Leonard eventually packed their belongings and moved to a modest residence on the outskirts of town. In the aftermath of these dramatic events, Silverwood Estates began to transform. With Victoria removed from power, the HOA started addressing genuine community issues rather than policing trivial matters driven by personal vendettas. The long-silenced neighbors gradually tore down the walls of indifference, openly discussing grievances and demanding fair treatment. One quiet evening as twilight draped over the estate, a resident named Carmen Reyes, a neighbor who had once seconded the vote against Victoria, approached Snoop Dogg carrying a plate of homemade cookies. "I know it's late," she said shyly, "but welcome to the neighborhood." Snoop accepted the plate with a gentle smile and a light laugh, replying, "Took you long enough." News of the dramatic showdown spread like wildfire through the community, serving as a powerful lesson on fairness, accountability, and the dangers of abusing authority. Snoop Dogg, who had journeyed from a weary touring artist to a staunch community leader, proved that true power is not derived from wielding rules as weapons but from standing up for what is right with dignity, intelligence, and calm resolve. As the sun set on another serene evening in Silverwood Estates, Snoop Dogg sat on his porch reflecting on the tumultuous journey that had brought him to this moment. Sipping his drink as the cool night air whispered promises of a better tomorrow, he mused softly, "Sometimes you've got to face the noise to bring back harmony." And with the stars twinkling overhead and neighbors now greeting one another with genuine warmth, it was unmistakably clear that justice had found its rhythm, a rhythm that Snoop Dogg had helped compose, note by righteous note.